Alright, how's it going, ladies and gentlemen? This is Mr. Crayer, and today, well, probably not when you're watching it, but right now is a snow day, and I can't believe that I've gotten so bored that I put together like a Prezi presentation for you. I've never done a Prezi, so let's just make sure this goes out. Alright. What I'm going to talk to you today about is how to shape evidence in your work. Mainly, we're going to be talking about this in the context of research, but it doesn't always have to be. There are three main ways that you can deal with integrating evidence into your paper, and I would suggest writing these down. Number one is the direct quotation, which I think most of you are very familiar with. You know, you take the exact words from the author and then pop it in there with the little quotation marks. Number two is summary. I think it's one you guys know, but is actually a little difficult to do properly. And then number three is paraphrasing, which I'm sure you've heard of, but I don't know if anyone actually knows how to do it properly. So, let's see if we can figure these three things out. Let's start with looking at the direct quotations. This is more of just if you need a refresher, but when you're using a direct quotation, it needs to be identical to the original, whatever source that you got it from. The key here is always to use a narrow segment of the source, and direct quotations are most powerful when it's very narrow. If you're quoting 2 or 3 lines from the original source, you're doing it wrong. So you might want to fix that. I doubt there's any time where there are like 3 amazing sentences that you couldn't have done better. So just know that you could probably do it better yourself if you have a really long quote. I do suggest that you use it when the source said it better than you, like maybe they used some sort of phrase that you couldn't use yourself without it sounding really awkward. Or I really like it when you're citing a fact, because I think it makes you look credible, it makes your source look credible, and there's really no way to better say it than probably the author said it in terms of that quote. So, here's my example. The author claims that over 1,000 children a year are diagnosed with ice cream deficiencies. From the source, the last name would be author, or the author's last name is Grader, and that was on page 20. And many more go undiagnosed. Completely tragic. We need to make sure all these kids are getting their ice cream. But you can see here what I did is this quote here is obviously the author's original words, and I like it this over 1,000 children a year, blah, 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 blah. I think it's better to have that directly from the quote, or directly from your source, because then you're like, oh, that fact is important. All right? Nothing too shocking there. The other thing I always say when you're using direct quotations is make sure that your words and the author's words flow together. I usually try and get the quote into the middle of the sentence if it fits without being awkward, and here I think it works without being too bizarre. Next up, let's talk about some paraphrasing. Please write this down. Paraphrasing is putting a passage from source material into your own words. Okay? Paraphrase material usually is shorter than wherever you're taking it from. Usually you're taking like a bigger section and you're condensing it. So maybe you've read, like a whole article from an author, you really like one of the paragraphs, and you want to paraphrase that paragraph into maybe one sentence. That would be paraphrasing. Okay? A quick note on all of this, though, is that all of it must be cited. Direct quotes, summary, paraphrasing, they all need to be cited. Usually this is best done with parenthetical citations. Parenthetical looks like a tough word. It means parentheses. This is a parenthetical citation. Try and use that in Scrabble if you ever can. It's a pretty cool word. Oh wait, no, you probably don't have enough letters. Oh well, I tried. Anyway, this would be, let's pretend that last article is real, and you want to paraphrase one of the paragraphs from the author. You could paraphrase it something like this. The author, I would probably want to say greater, but just for the sake of it, the author points out that if children do not get enough ice cream in their daily diet, it can lead to depression and diarrhea, both terrible things that you want to avoid at all costs. Okay? The original author might have said it a little bit more lengthy, but we want to cut it down because we just want to say it and then move on to maybe our warrant where we support this piece of evidence. So a paraphrasing works perfectly here. Okay, moving on. I'm not going to go over this too much, but paraphrasing does seem to be where most people get tripped up. I think out of the three of these, Paraphrasing is the one you do the least, so if you need help, pause the video right now, write down these 4 steps, and give it a shot. Paraphrasing is key, especially when you're moving on to college. You're going to have to be able to master this step, especially when you're reading multiple sources. It's best to paraphrase instead of trying to quote every single thing. All right? Then moving on finally to summarizing. It's where you put the main ideas into your own words, including mainly only the main points. Okay? So you don't want to cover every single point the author makes, just mainly only the important things. The way I kind of think about summarizing versus paraphrasing is summarizing is when you take like the whole article and then you shorten it down to just a little bit, versus paraphrasing is more like taking a chunk of the article and then making it into something really small. So like you summarize an article and you paraphrase part of an article. Hopefully that makes sense. Summarize the whole thing, boil it down to just its main points. Paraphrasing, take a smaller chunk and then boil that down to its, maybe more of supporting details. Okay? If I was going to argue, like take this whole article and summarize it up, I would just say, the author argues for the increase in adolescent ice cream intake. That's basically the point of this article that I made up. And once again, you'll see I kept that parenthetical citation, but since there's no like page number, I'm summarizing the whole thing. You just need to say, the author's last name, so I know which author you're talking about. You wouldn't even have to cite this with the last name if you just said, Grader argues for the increase in adolescent ice cream intake, period. There you've summarized the whole thing and you've made it clear who the author is. And so parenthetical citation isn't always necessary if you can give us that information a little bit ahead of time. All right? It's one of those things where it's always a little bit easier to learn about, like learn the different definitions of these things, but it's another thing to practice it. And so hopefully if you're watching this video on the website, now you can scroll down a little bit and actually practice this to make sure you've got a handle on it. And I like Prezzies. That one's so bad. I could totally do another one of those.